Welcome back to BBB Adventures and the Builder series at Frank's Place. This episode is part 3 of our effort to complete a comprehensive 30,000-mile maintenance cycle on our 1993 Toyota Motorhome named Byrdie. Part 2 ended with me trying to get the inner bearing race off the passenger side front spindle, which was inexplicably stuck. Now let's see if the heat works to loosen the race. Beautiful. Beautiful. A little bit of heat. That's fantastic news. Now clearly, the bearing is not spun on that, so that's good news. I don't have to replace the spindle. That's such good news. Such good news. All right. Now I gotta clean this up, and I gotta order some new bearings. Well, here's an update. I got the numbers off these bearings, and these are Timken bearings made in the USA, which means they're probably not original. So I probably didn't need to do any of this. So it looks like probably when they replaced the brakes, replaced and repacked these bearings. So this is the problem with buying a car you don't have any records for. The bearing supply store in Idaho Falls had these bearings in stock. Mary Beth is going to pick those up. O'Reilly's has a seal, so I'll pick that up at some point. But I'm going to spend the rest of the day pressing those races out of this hub and pressing the new races in and getting this hub put back together. Okay, well, MB brought me the new bearings, Timken bearings. I've double checked as best I can without unwrapping them to make sure they're the same size. I'm pretty sure they're right. I cleaned up the spindle. I've inspected the spindle. It looks really good. I am first going to clean up as much of the grease as possible. So I'm going to take this over to the parts cleaner, clean out the inside of the hub, get all the wheel bearing grease out of it. All right, I got this hub cleaned up. I got most of the grease out of it. And now what we're going to do is we got to get these races, these bearing races, which are pressed into the hub. This is a small one for the outside, and on the inside one it's bigger. But we gotta get these races out of there. The best way to do that, I think, if you don't have a hydraulic press and all the tooling, is if you look down in there, there's some openings, some slots in the hub that give you access to the back of the race. So you take a punch and you punch it out, and you can get it to come out. You can get it to you just sort of pound it out of there. So that's what we're going to do. I hope you can see, but there's now a little gap between the race and the surface of the hub. So I'm gonna keep going. Yeah, you can see there's a big gap there now. And this race is about to come completely out of the hub. Ta-da! That's it. That's one of the races. Now, I gotta do the small side. You do it exactly the same way. Got it. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna make some tools to push the new race in. This will become essentially a pressing tool or a fixture that I can use to press the new bearing in, but I don't want it to be the interference fit that this is, so I'm gonna sand the outside of this diameter down until it is a loose fit. I'm pretty sure that's not enough, but let me show you what I'm doing, just in case it's not clear. But I'm going to grind the outside of this until it fits down in this with clearance. So then I can use this to press the new race in. It's getting there. I got a little bit more work to do. A little bit more grinding. So I'm going to continue to grind on this one, then I'm going to grind the bigger one, and I'll check back in when I got these things ground down. I got the outside of these ground down, and you can see it's a nice clearance fit. So this is gonna help me press in the new race. So now I got both of these done, by the way. I got the little one, the inner and the outer bearing ground down and ready to go. So now I'm gonna clean up this hub where the race goes really good on both sides, just to make sure that there's no debris in there. And then I'm gonna use my shot press to press in the race. So got the hub on the press. A couple of things to note. I used these blocks, so I'm actually supporting it on the flange of the hub, and these blocks luckily are just long enough that the lug bolts are not touching the press. So all the force is going to go through the cast iron and not the bolts, not the lug bolts. Okay. Now you want to make sure that this is really clean. You don't want anything that's going to prevent the race from fully seating against that flange in there. So I've cleaned that up really well. And so now I'm going to unwrap the bearing and get the inner race out. Okay, so this is the race that gets pressed into the hub. So I'm going to use these two pieces of steel to get it started. Now you want to make sure that the plunger on the press is as centered as possible, so that the force is evenly distributed. Oh, that's perfect. Okay, now we can make sure things are sort of centered up. That looks pretty centered. Now the press is starting to put force. Yep, started to go in. So now I've bottomed out. So now I'm going to back off and put that ring on there that we made out of the old race. Okay, you can see it's going down. Okay, it got really hard, which means it's probably seated. So I'm going to back off and inspect it. Yep, it looks like it's fully seated. Perfect. Very good. Now I'll do the other side. Okay, I've turned the hub upside down, or now we're on the other side, the smaller race. This is the new race. I just took it out of the bearing package. And I'm supporting it. The part of the hub actually pokes out past this surface of the brake rotor. So I don't really want to support it on that hub. So I've used these blocks that have these in them. And so I'm supporting this whole thing on this brake surface. I got a lot of surface area, so the load is spread over a big distance. So I've cleaned this up. Now I just want to get this started. So luckily I have this socket that is a really good fit. So now this will help me get started, but I need to center it up on the press. So now I'm going to start to pump the press. The race is starting to get pressed down into the hub. We got the spacer we made out of the old race installed. Now let's push it. There it goes. Okay, I think it's seated because it got really hard. Pull this out, pull that out, and it does look seated. It does look like it's properly seated into the hub. We've just installed the new races. So I picked up the new hub seal. The new seal goes in the back of the hub. I got these bearings. So now the next step is to pack these bearings, install them in the hub, install this seal, and then reassemble the hub back onto the spindle. So this is a messy job. So I recommend wearing gloves. This is the grease. High temperature disc brake wheel bearing grease. This is the inside, the larger bearing. I'm gonna do it first so that I can press the seal on, then I can turn it on its side and do this bearing. Then I can carry the whole assembly over and put it on the spindle. One of the things I wanna do is I wanna get some grease in this cavity in between, inside the hub. It's good to pack this area with grease so the grease can get to the bearing. Okay, so now to pack the bearing, you want to get grease inside all of each one of these rollers. You want to get it inside there. So what you do is you put a big gob of this on your hand and you work it in. You just work it in. You just want to keep working at it. Sort of pushing it, just really pushing that grease in. You want this interstitial space between the race and the bearing cage needs to be full of grease. You can spin the bearing, try it some more. You just got to keep working at it. Okay, I think I got that pretty good. And you can tell I'm getting grease on this, so this surface will have to be thoroughly cleaned before it gets anywhere near a brake pad. You want this lip to be lubed so that it easily goes onto the place on the spindle that it rubs on. Okay. This is a seal driver. I think, see this seal, this driving surface is bigger than this edge of the hub, so it's not going to overdrive the seal. But you do want to make sure that the seal is uniformly installed. I think that's got it. I'm not going to set this down on the carpet because I don't want to get a bunch of dirt in there. So I am now going to pack that bearing, set it in there. This is done the same way. I'm going to go put a little light coating of grease on the spindle, particularly where the seal runs. Okay, to clean the brake surfaces, I've got some handy dandy brake cleaner. So I want to try not to get any of this in the bearing. Just going to get it on the brake surface. Now, one of the things you want to do when you're putting the hub on is make sure that you keep it centered on the spindle so you don't damage that seal. Okay, now we got it in there and it's sitting on the bearing. So now you clean this up a little bit and you put this washer back, which is the washer that's used to preload the bearing. Then there's this nut. But you got to preload it, which means you tighten it up tight and it sets the bearings. You spin it after you get it there, then you back it off and then you adjust the tension. So the first step is to tighten it up so that you've set the bearings, but I need to look up the torque. So I think the spec is 25 foot-pounds. It turns out I don't have a socket for that nut, but I have this. It's a 12-inch socket. It's a 12-inch crescent wrench. So I'm going to tighten it till I feel like I'm putting about 25 pounds of force on the end of this, which will get me approximately 25 foot-pounds. Yeah, I think that's about 25 pounds. Then you spin the bearing. Now the bearings are set. Then you back this off. You hand tighten it until it takes about 10 pounds to move this. It says in the manual to use a spring gauge, a spring force gauge to pull in one of these. And it should be about 10 pounds. So I'm gonna have to estimate that. I don't have a spring gauge. There's no end plate. I'm gonna spin this for a while. I think that feels good. This star nut captures the nut on the spindle. You put this cotter pin through there and it keeps it from rotating. And so you gotta turn this thing around until you find one of the slots that lines up with the hole in the side. That's pretty close. Then you bend the cotter pin. So now the star nut is holding the nut that holds the preload on the bearing, and this cotter pin is not going to allow it to back off and get loose. Because if it did, you would lose your front wheel. This whole thing, this little cotter pin and that little deal, basically prevents your front wheel from flying off. So it's really important. I'm going to put the dust cap back on. I'm going to fill it. And those bearings are repacked. We're going to clean up this brake surface again, and we're going to reassemble the brake assembly. I'm cleaning these surfaces. What I've been doing is squirting this brake cleaner on there and just making sure that these surfaces on this rotor are clear of grease. I got to put this frame back. I think it's a good idea to put a little bit of brake lube on the surfaces that the brake pads slide on. You got to be really careful with this stuff. You do not want to get grease, even this stuff, anywhere near the brake pad surfaces or the surface of the rotor. So I'm going to dab this in a few places, wipe off any excess. I've reinstalled this thing. Those are the two bolts that hold it on. Okay, I gotta torque these down. Oh, you spilled your food. Yeah, you better eat it. I had to build Disco this playpen because he was getting into some mischief in the shop. The shop's actually sort of a dangerous place for a little tiny 4-pound doggy. He doesn't really like it, but he gets to be with his daddy. He gets to be with his daddy in the shop. That's enough, buddy. I'm just over here. All right, this is the brake pad. And this little plate that goes on here is the anti-squeal plate. And I put a little lube on the back of this so this thing will be lubed against the brake pad. Okay. Okay. What the hell? I don't remember. When I took them off, it seemed like it was going to be obvious, but now it's not so obvious. I don't understand. I don't understand. All right. After really looking at this and thinking about it, this is how these things go on here, and I sort of remember it. But they go through these holes. They go through the holes in the brake shoes, the brake pads. And they act like a damper spring, so as these things try to vibrate and squeal, these sort of help dampen out that vibration. So it makes sense that it would span both of those. So that's clearly how this goes. This has 2 bolts, one's longer than the other. I'm gonna put some of this grease, because I do believe this bolt acts like the sliding surface for the calipers. So I got the bottom one in. That is all back together.
One might think I would leave the driver's side alone, since I learned on the passenger side that the brakes and bearings were likely recently replaced. But you'd be wrong. I decided to repack the driver's side bearings just so I'd know they were done at the same time as the passenger side. Luckily, the hub assembly came off the driver's side with no issue, and upon inspection the bearings looked great, so I repacked them with new grease, and then reinstalled the hub and reassembled the brakes.
One of the things I've decided to do at this time with this 30,000 mile maintenance cycle is new shocks. So I ordered some Bilstein shocks that I believe are the right ones. I believe these are the right ones, but before I get this all dirty and nasty, I'm going to take the old shock off and, you know, do a side-by-side comparison. Yeah. First things I'm going to do is squirt some WD-40 on these bolts. Let that start to soak in. Now I'm going to move this jack underneath the lower control arm and support this to take as much pressure off the shock as possible. Okay, that one's coming. That's nice. Okay, those are loose. Now the tricky one's always the one at the top. If I'm lucky, the shaft won't spin, but you can see it's going to. So there's this little slot at the top. I usually put a vice grip on there, clamp it, and back that off. So yeah, see, it's still spinning. Nope. This is the worst part about shocks. I may have to put a little heat on this. Okay, I've got both vice grips on here. I've heated it up and I've got it broke loose. So, yeah. Amazing what a little WD-40 and some heat will do. Give it the heat. Now I'm gonna put the jack underneath. And there the shock falls out the bottom. So nice. Yeah, you can tell this shock's wore out. Okay, I think this is good. I think this shock's gonna fit. Well, let's go put it in. It's okay, buddy. You have to stay in there. It's safe for you. A shop is a dangerous place. Through the opening. There it goes. Okay, and I am going to not tighten that up yet. I'm going to do the bottom first and then come back and tighten that. Okay. See that now it's spinning. Not sure how to stop it on this. Okay, so these shocks have an Allen keyhole in the top of the shaft. So that's how you tighten it. It says in the instructions that you have to finish tightening this to torque specs after the weight is on. So we're going to have to put the wheel on and then reach up here and get to that. So that'll be a pain in the ass.
Now we can check off front brakes and wheel bearings off the 30,000 mile list, as well as new front shocks. I also drained and refilled the rear differential, which was made quite easy thanks to the drain plug Toyota put in the differential housing. I also drained and flushed the coolant.
By the way, in the coolant flush, this thing had green coolant in it, and I wanted to use yellow. So I ran through multiple iterations. I dumped all of the coolant out, the coolant that was in there. I did that with the petcock on the bottom of the radiator. I pulled the lower radiator hose because I think that helps drain the block more. I did that, sealed it all back up, put the hose back on, closed the petcock, poured distilled water in the radiator, ran it until it was at temperature, let it cool off, drained all that out. I did that multiple times, I think 3 times with water, until when I drained it, the fluid was clear. That way I got all of the green fluid, and you do that when you run the heater. When you do that, you run the heater on high so it circulates coolant through the heater core. And I did that until it was clear, and then I put in this Peak, this Peak coolant. It's yellow in color. You do that because you're really not supposed to mix different colors of coolant. So it was green, I'm going to yellow, so I wanted to make sure I flushed it out completely of the old green coolant. I even checked the timing. It is at 10 degrees below top dead center, which is right where it needs to be, and the engine's actually running very well. So I'm pretty happy with the 30,000 mile maintenance cycle. I think the running gear in this thing is in good shape.
I did a few things to the rest of Byrdie before our winter trip south, including resealing the windows in the cab over bedroom with some ProFlex RV sealant, and I resealed all the seams in the roof with some paint on RV roof sealant. At this point, Byrdie was ready for a trip so we could learn more about what we do and don't like about her 1.0 configuration. Thanks for watching. See you next time.